Welcome to the Glolent podcast, the podcast for remote work and freelancing in practice. Welcome to this new episode of the Glolent podcast, the podcast about remote work and freelancing in practice. And I'm happy to welcome one of our Glolent members who joined recently. It's Erwan Compes. I hope I pronounced your name correctly.
Yeah, perfect. Thanks for having me on.
Yeah, my pleasure. And thanks for doing the podcast with us. Erwan has been traveling and a digital nomad for a couple of years. He's originally from France and lived in Berlin and now moved back to Tahiti because he misses the sea and the nature there. And he's working from anywhere as an interactive designer and a UX designer. And thank you, Erwan, for coming to this podcast. And if I missed something, just feel free to add.
All right. All good.
All good. Great. So, it's very, it's very unusual, let's say, to be a nomad that works from Tahiti. What brought you there? That was something that was basically sticking out when I saw that and when I heard of that. Can you tell us a little bit more, like what your process was? I just rushed through it in the intro, and maybe you can give a little bit more details and background to that.
Sure. I originally moved here back in 2014, and I lived here for 2 years. And what drew me to the island is just a general, likeness for tropical weather, nature, especially the ocean, and surfing. And it's a French territory, so that made it a great place for me to move there without any, visa issues and having the same language, while at the same time being pretty isolated from the world. It's in the South Pacific with a pretty big gap between it and the next continent. And I just like the idea of being isolated and, trying to work online from a place that's really remote.
Apparently the internet connection is pretty good. They have fiber connections, I guess. In
they do. Unfortunately, it doesn't reach where I live yet. And I'm actually on the 4G router.
Okay.
On 4G internet until they extend the fiber optic connections to here. And internet is generally pretty expensive here.
Okay.
Pretty low bandwidth compared to Europe or the US.
What's the general cost of living there? Like, is it comparable with some European cities, or?
I would say it's comparable with France, for example.
Okay.
Maybe even with Berlin, although Berlin's a little cheaper than the rest of Germany in terms of food and a lot of commodities. But it really depends on your lifestyle, right? If you consume a lot of, for example, imported foods, of course it's going to be more expensive because it's so isolated, and there's a pretty steep import tax here. And that's actually one of the ways that generate income for the government is mostly through the import tax, because there's no income tax here.
Oh, wow.
And,
okay.
Anything that's imported, especially electronics. For example, I don't know, if you want to buy a MacBook, you can buy it at a local store and pay a pretty steep price, or import it and then pay import taxes, and it's usually 30% on import.
Oh,
but all in all, you can live for pretty cheap, I would say. Accommodation is pretty similar to, I would say, a mid-sized town in France, and you can get some high-quality local produce, fruits and veggies. You can fish. That's a plus if you're into that. And the cost is mostly for imported goods.
I think that's fair. Yeah, if there's no income tax, there's some way they have to provide for the infrastructure. So that makes sense. And for the government costs. So how many people actually live there in Tahiti?
So Tahiti is the main island of French Polynesia, which is a French territory. It's its own country, if you will, that comprises about 120 islands.
Okay.
Some of them are desert islands, like typical picturesque, desert island. and some of them are bigger, like Tahiti, and Tahiti is the biggest one. There's about 200,000 inhabitants in all of on the entirety of French Polynesia, and most of them are on Tahiti. I think about 180,000 are on Tahiti.
Okay, that's
one of the things that also attracted me, is that it's not very densely populated, so it's still quite preserved, and I don't know. I like to deal with less people. Cities, Berlin is cool, but in the long term, I think it's fits my lifestyle a little better.
Yeah, I came to a similar conclusion actually, but I also originally I come from Berlin. Like I lived in Berlin a long time, and I lived in big cities all my life, and now I'm living in the south of Spain, basically in Malaga, but in a part where there's a lot of nature. It's very calm. You don't hear any traffic, and that really helps with with concentration and with basically having like a healthy lifestyle. So I feel like stress.
Yeah, so you get what I mean. Yeah, a couple of months ago, I was into some studies that I read that were talking about the size of our social circles, and how for example, people who have thousands of friends on social media actually provides stress in terms of social and emotional pressure.
Yeah.
And realistically, the scientists found out that the size, let's say the breaking point of a social circle is about 99 people.
Okay.
I think that how much you can realistically engage with people, and
I heard the same. Yeah, it's about 100 people. Yeah, 120 or something. Yeah, some studies say. Before you cannot maintain more relationships.
Oh, you can, but then the quality of these relationships just tend to degrade over time.
Yeah, sure. I think the basic terminology "friend" for someone on a social media channel is just wrong.
Yeah,
more like an acquaintance, something.
So after I read that, I actually went on a kind of frenzy, like deleting people and just like reducing all my social media circles as well, whether it's be the number of people I follow on Instagram or friends that I had on Facebook. And I just found out that it just really tends to help with focusing.
Oh, definitely.
You don't feel like you're dealing with too many people, and then you really know people that you deal with, or at least you follow them for a reason. So, for example, on Instagram, I'm into photography, people that inspire me to create more, and the rest I just removed. Yeah, and I think it's a pretty good cleanup that people should do, not only on social media but in their life as well. Really be careful.
A lot of people do this recently. Like it's a digital detox basically, and it is kind of getting more popular because you realize when you walk down the street, like how many people just look at their phones, and how many people in cafes don't talk to each other but look at their phones at dinner or at at social events. And it's kind of weird, like also these pictures when you go to concerts and people film the concert on their phone, and they look through the phone to watch the stage, and that's so weird because you got the real experience there, high quality, and you prefer to watch it through these goggles. I think do you think like there's a backwards trend, or do you think we have still not reached the peak in terms of our addiction to social media and media in general?
It's hard to tell, but with the evolution of technology, especially when we're talking about VR, I would say that sort of disconnect between real life interactions and virtual interactions is still going to grow, especially when virtual reality becomes more and more lifelike. And I think more and more people will rather interact within that controlled, technological environment that they can just do without going anywhere, rather than do it in real life. And at the same time, you got definitely a movement back to, people are not satisfied with these kind of exchanges and are looking for something a little more authentic. Maybe sometimes, cutting off some of their technology tools and going back to something a little bit more analog or traditional.
Yeah, basically both ways. And I think the majority of people is still addicted basically to their devices.
It's a double-edged sword, right? You can't just completely write off social media and technology and devices, because it's also in many ways a great window. Like, how crazy that we live in this time where at any time you can just find whatever you want and learn a new skill online, or just follow the life of someone you don't even know or couldn't even follow, or even interact with back 50 years ago.
Exactly, yeah.
But it's all about balance, right? It's all about control and just being able to be aware of where your attention goes, your focus goes, and crafting your sort of life experience so that you reach whatever you want in life. Don't get distracted.
Exactly, yeah. Like, it would be interesting to know and to measure how long you can basically focus, usually without being distracted by notifications or multitasking, basically, right?
Like lock up someone in a room and just bombard them with actual notifications.
That's so weird. I mean, I have the same problem. That kind of when I hear this notification sound on my phone or on my computer, and I know there's some things waiting, and I don't know what. There is like a surge pulling me to that. Like there's almost like a physical sensation telling me
like an itch you want to scratch.
Yeah, exactly. Like what just happened, and maybe it's important. And you start to tell yourself these stories. Maybe it could be that person or this thing, and if I don't answer, and I just found myself more often than not just reacting to this without really actively deciding to do it. And it's so hard to control, but it's so important, because especially if you are into creative things, if you have a creative profession, then you're basically you're dependent on having also a flow, not being distracted, like focusing 100% on things. And if you then have these interruptions, that really messes with your productivity, I think.
Sure. Usually when I work, I go full airplane mode, and actually disabled most of the notifications for anything that doesn't relate to direct contact, like phone messages and Messenger. The rest is just disabled.
Yeah, that makes sense. That makes a lot of sense. I do that too, mostly, but a lot of the times I have to deal with many things at the same time. But at the same
it's
time,
still a lot.
Yeah, it is still a lot. So but that's like one of the challenges of our time. Like you said, we do have these windows that connect us with the great minds of our time, or people we want to follow, or we're able to share things with a lot of people and have basically this outlet that creates also huge potential. Basically, do you feel that replaces the social need a little bit, like that people, especially now,
to some extent, yeah. To some extent, especially like working from an island here, there's not really a design industry. I know a few people who might be into design or other fields that I'm interested in, like photography, but for the most part, you would grow much faster and better towards your goals if you're surrounded by people who inspire you, right? Or into the same things. And to some extent, I think you can replicate that by just feeding your mind with, the work of other people on social media and, other outlets that you can follow it's all about what you give your mind, I think, to and also your emotional being. But I think it falls a little short in terms of emotion. It's always better to have like a solid group of people that you can hang out with and you're into the same thing. But it's cool to be able to be inspired by designers and photographers online and raise your potential this way.
Yes, definitely. Do you recommend any specific platform for designers?
I mean, people probably know about Dribbble. Mm-hmm. Dribbble is cool for the kind of crazy, creative, and at times a bit too trendy design. A lot of these things on there are not meant, for actual products and are not really actually intended to be taken as serious design explorations. But they provide, some inspiration for experimenting with shapes, colors, and just being exposed to other perspectives. I think is good. Though I would say I probably rely more on the award sites. I use an extension called Best Stuff, Maxi Best Stuff.
Okay.
It's coded by a French agency, I think. And what it does is they basically aggregate feeds from awards.com with 3W, the FWA, CSS Design Awards, and other design award sites. And this way, when you open a new tab in Chrome, you have this feed of interesting new websites that were posted on these award sites. So it's a pretty good way. I use that a lot to, something catches my eye in the thumbnail, to just go on the website and see if there's a design pattern that I might be interested in, and see if I can use that for a project. So that's I would say that's the biggest part of my inspiration. Then I'm a member of a couple of communities on Slack centered around product design and UX UI design, also front-end development. The problem with that is all the spam.
Yeah, that's true. If you subscribe to all the channels, and it's hard to unsubscribe also on Slack, because you also, again, you see these notifications.
Yeah, the notification system on Slack is not really well crafted for, phasing out some notifications for specific channels and things like this.
Yeah, that's true. If you could just
could just subscribe to one channel and opt in to the channels you want, and the rest you don't receive anything.
Yeah, exactly. And even in these channels you could filter. That would be good. Yeah, I'm part of a lot of WhatsApp groups here in Malaga, that basically local WhatsApp groups for business-minded people, or for just hanging out and going hiking. Like there's a group just for hiking.
That's cool.
And some others for the co-working and so on. And I muted all these groups, but you still see something pop up every time someone writes something. So it always, when I open my WhatsApp, then I always see these 20 notifications that I haven't read, 20 messages that I haven't read. And it's really, would be great to just...
And then you're back in that loop where you're tempted to, go read them and turn off these new badges.
Actually, I kind of, when it gets too much, I kind of have now, I'm able to just ignore that for the most part. But then again, I have no value for these groups, because I don't look into them. And then the idea is I will also miss a lot of things. So something that would interest me. So definitely there would be great to have some filters or something that could adjust, like content-based even. If someone, if the filter realizes, okay, there's some event coming up, someone shared an event, then only then you will be notified or something. But because this is creating a lot of spam, basically. If you're in, especially if you're on different channels everywhere, on Telegram, WhatsApp, Facebook, Slack, and so on, it's like an overkill of information, basically.
Yeah, absolutely. I feel the same.
And how's the, like here in Malaga, we have a lot of expats also that do we do a lot of things together and go to hikes together, hang out together, do events together, and so on. And I feel that's really something that I value, and that's important to me. Is that you said there's not a big community of professional designers in Tahiti. Is there some kind of expat community that's comparable to in the beginnings, or it's comparable to something in the more popular digital nomad locations? Or
I think it's a little different here because it's a French territory. So there are a lot of people, come from France, from mainland France, come to live here. Even though there are a lot of more locals and local, Polynesians, but people don't really view themselves as expats. We speak the same language. We're part of the same country, actually, and so there isn't really that that split between locals and expats, which I think doesn't really contribute to this kind of community building. And you do have some groups, for example, for trail running. A lot of groups on Facebook. People use Facebook a lot here. Like it's the main mode of communication for everyone living here. So there are a lot of groups, for selling things, organizing things, people baking, selling things. So a lot of more themed group, based on, an activity. But I find that, I don't really use those much, actually, just because it's pretty small again, you tend to meet people pretty easily, and, you can hang out with people pretty regularly because you're not that far away.
Yeah, I think it's also, it's not bad to have more organic kind of setup, because you end up not only hanging out with expats and actually getting
and the language barrier is a big factor in that. Everybody speaks French.
Yeah, that's true. How was that in Berlin? Did you did you involve with a local? There's a big startup and big design and creative community in Berlin. Did you get involved in that? How did you find that?
Sure. So interesting thing, I lived in Berlin for 2 years. I started learning German, but then I decided not to do it and spend my time otherwise.
Okay.
So I was, just because of the work, and interacting with Germans every day, I began to understand German pretty damn well, but I wouldn't be able to speak it very much. And in terms of, the design community, it's pretty prevalent in Berlin. There's groups everywhere. I was a member of Factory for a while.
Oh, yeah, sure.
And also, I worked a lot with an agency, 2 agencies there. And so I was, around a pretty solid design and development community there. But that was about it. I'm not really into, I would sometimes go to meetups, for example, the WeWork ones and the WeWork events. But I usually don't really go to meetups. I'm more of a, pretty spontaneous, like I want to do something, I think of it, and I don't really plan it. So it doesn't really work out with big groups.
Yeah, definitely. I know that thing. And also, it kind of becomes like a commitment that you don't want to make, maybe a liability even to subscribe to the meetups as well, to go to these meetup events all the time.
Yeah, I think that's something that I'm not really good at. I don't really feel good about constraints and having to fit a schedule that is not mine. I guess that's also one of the reasons why, I'm a freelancer, and also why I live somewhere on an island.
Yeah, definitely. That makes sense. And do you have a kind of normal routine that you follow? Although you don't have this constraints, do you find yourself in a routine anyways, or do you really try to live as spontaneous as possible?
It's pretty spontaneous, but there's really, people can tell themselves that they can do anything. But usually at one given time, you only may be doing, 3, 4 things, and then that's pretty much it day to day. And so, for example, the way I spend my days, what I did today is this morning I got up at 4. I did a bit of work, and then I went surfing. That's something I do almost every day, go in the ocean, whether it's surfing or shooting surfers or marine life. And then I come back, have a meal, take a little break, get some more work done, and maybe relax a little bit at night. So that's usually what I'm doing, just surfing, exploring, some photography and design.
Sounds like a great balance. Yeah.
Yeah, it feels good. It feels good, man. I definitely felt like something was missing a little bit in Berlin. I really, really, really liked the community and the fact that there's actually groups around anything. I was into jiu-jitsu back there. But whatever you're into, you can find a group that's pretty tight together, and you can learn things pretty quickly. And I thought that was pretty good, socially speaking.
Yes.
But one of the most basic things, I guess, that contributes to me feeling balanced and feeling happy is to be able to go in the ocean and to have nature just out my backyard.
Yeah, definitely. I feel the same.
So matter choices, It's a bit of a trade-off, especially if you're into the hustle of big cities. Although Berlin is a bit different in that regard, but to have access to all that cultural diversity, all those different scenes, that's something that I like, but it's a bit less important on my list than what I have here.
Yeah, I can understand. I can relate to this. I feel the older I get, the more I appreciate actually having like a natural environment, being surrounded by, the ocean and by forests and trees and parks and so on, compared to having this crazy city lifestyle. Yeah, I think it's, especially if you really want to relax, it's something crucial to. It's so natural. It feels. I'm way calmer here than I was basically when I lived in Hamburg before I moved here. Because, yeah, even like the little things. I get up here and I just hear the birds outside. So like basically, when I sleep with an open window, I just get woken up by the birds. And in Berlin, in Hamburg, I was woken up by four-way crossing in front of my apartment. That's really that gets to you. That really kind of has like it feels like traffic and this noise and city life and this stress, and people are accumulating that stress, and they get more disconnected. I feel often like people are way nicer in the countryside or in like natural places. I feel because they are also more relaxed. So it's like something that feeds itself somehow. And I felt like, okay, I got to break out of this circle because it's just not. It's just doesn't feel like a good way to live for me anymore. Like to be around this stressful environment all the time. Although, like you said, you have the access to the great people and knowledge and industry and all that. It doesn't justify the price you pay for me. Like, doesn't make sense.
Yeah, and I think actually there's a part of it that I really like, that I crave sometimes. The fact of being in the city and just really focusing on work and just being caught in that flow. But it works only in the short term for me. So yeah. I even thought of, something that maybe would work as being, I don't know, a couple of months, back in the city and then coming back here and sort of striking a balance this way. But so far I'm experimenting with being fully away from that.
Yeah, definitely. That's why what my biggest challenge here is to build myself a routine that is not too constrained. but also allows me to basically feel I'm still in the flow of getting things done and evolving, also career-wise and in my skills and with the company. So it is, I think, for you even bigger challenge because where you were, it's a lot more, it's a lot more natural and isolated than where I am, basically. But I can imagine the challenge. But
A little bit, yeah.
yeah, but it's also, in some senses, I can imagine a lot more rewarding to have the full experience also. So it's always something, you have to kind of balance out. But I feel if you have a good internet connection and if you manage to basically build like a small local community of people that have the same interest, doesn't need to be a lot of people. I think just a handful is usually enough. You can. It doesn't really matter anymore if you're surrounded by all these opportunities because you will end up focusing on things anyway.
You know what? I actually hadn't given much thought to that, but after this, I think I'm going to try and garner a community here. Maybe start a group on Facebook or maybe a Slack where people can talk about design and maybe gather up and do some projects together.
Yeah, that's what basically also gives me that kick here. Let's say, like it feeds into that part of me that wants to stay active and work-wise. Just a couple of people who you meet and who you regularly see on a meetup or something, and you have the same interest and you exchange knowledge and so on. It can be very, very motivating and powerful. And it would be like the perfect balance, and it is the perfect balance to, the more, let's say, isolated or the more, differently focused daily life that I have here on a daily basis. So if I have these kind of meetings every 2 weeks or something, I feel still connected somehow.
Yeah, makes sense. You know what my biggest challenge is actually working from here. So I rarely get clients. I don't really have to look for work so much. But a lot of people confuse Tahiti. Like they know Bora Bora. Bora Bora is pretty well known in movies and so on. It's in the same, it's on French Polynesia as well. But Tahiti, they don't know about it. And usually when they hear it, what they actually hear is Haiti. So they think you live in this country where it's pretty much barren and there's devastating poverty. And, when you're talking about making, some business deals and going into work with someone, it usually is
that's the biggest challenge.
Yeah.
Oh man, it shouldn't be actually. But even if it was Haiti, right? But they get suspicious, or?
No, it's just I remember first I used to, on some other networks like Glolent, I used to actually put my location down as Honolulu, Hawaii, because we're on the same time zone. It's not that far. It's actually one of the closest places.
Yeah.
Hawaii, but it's, when you say Hawaii, especially Americans, I work a lot with US clients, they know immediately what you're talking about. And so it's sort of, avoiding me to have that discussion in the first place.
And it has a positive connotation, basically.
Totally.
Yeah.
A lot of people, a lot of clients actually talk to me. They're like, "Oh, that's the dream." From there as well. It's pretty funny. But now actually I've gone back and put it really as, Tahiti, French Polynesia. And I want to actually, do the real thing and, try and get through this and see how it affects my business after a couple of months.
That's interesting. Yeah. If you also say Hawaii and you touch onto that thing that many, many people have, that their dream is to one day retire and basically move to an island like you actually did and live the life that you actually live. although they might have, a successful company, but they're still tied up in daily life and business and so on, so they can't do it. So
oh, for sure. And the green is always the grass is always greener on the other side.
Yeah, definitely.
You got people who are like thinking of why when they're like in really interesting roles in companies in the US, and sometimes I'm thinking, oh wow, that would actually be cool to be working, in the core of the tech community there in San Francisco.
Yeah,
but
definitely.
in the end, I guess that balance with nature always wins for me.
Yeah, definitely.
And it's also an interesting challenge, like it's in a way moving away from the rest of society and trying to prove to myself that I can create the lifestyle that I want, and I can, manifest the work that I want also from a distance. And I really like working remotely and actually overcoming people's perception of, what it is to work remotely. A lot of companies, something that's really interesting me lately is that a lot of companies offer roles and they really don't want to have something new. They want to have someone on location.
Yes,
I can recognize there are a lot of advantages because you interact with people, face to face on a daily basis. Communication is easier, but in my experience, having worked both in agency, at clients, and remotely, fully remotely, I find that I'm much more productive working remotely.
Yeah,
because there's not a group of people around you with constant meetings that actually distract you from your work. And the challenge is to be able to communicate almost as well as you would do face to face. And I find that oftentimes what creates failure in remote projects is that people tend to under communicate. So
yes,
yeah, that's I think the key for me, and I think it's an interesting challenge. It is something that's really keeping me passionate about this kind of work.
Definitely, and you're definitely on the forefront of things there. Like if you talk about working for some of the big players in Silicon Valley and so on, one of the charms is to be on the forefront of some movement or some technological advancement and so on. But I feel we as remote workers are on the forefront of the new working style and figuring out how to make it work, basically, to work remotely, because it only has been possible now for many people for the last decade, maybe, and that's gradually progressing. And so we don't know anything about how to
for sure
efficiently make it.
Do you see us as pioneers, blazing new trails?
Yeah, I mean, I see us a little bit as pioneers, but it's also kind of messy, It's like a messy pioneerism. So we do a lot of trial and errors, and there's not a lot of. There are a lot of books on the subject, like how to make it work and what the challenges of remote teams are, and so on, and remote companies and so on. But really to basically figure out your work-life balance, figure out how to be productive, figure out communication with a team, figure out how to deliver on time, how to set deadlines, timelines, and basically split tasks into chunks that can independently be solved, and so on. This is I feel this. There is a lot of pioneerism in this, and it will, I think, pay off in the long term when you have the expertise and you spent the time in figuring this out, and basically that will be a great asset to a lot of companies, I think, also.
Absolutely, I agree. Especially when you think that one way to look at it is that right now companies are limiting their work to talent that can be sourced locally or that is willing to relocate, and also in an employee scheme. And you have the potential when working remotely to access talent globally, So you could actually, as a headhunter or recruiter, find the person that really fits for the job better than anyone else,
Yeah.
regardless of where they are. And then people who work remotely, then again, you can work as an employee, but people who work remotely and freelance are, again, I would say, more ready to, be compensated in a way that's more advantageous for the company, because they don't have all these constraints of having to show up at X place at this time and having to, log hours in a way that's more conventional.
Yeah, exactly. You can also, creative people often prefer to work in sprints, basically. So usually I know I do, and a lot of people I know do. It's not a marathon. It's a number of sprints that with pauses in between. So what people usually do is they work on a project really hard. They work on it intensively for a couple of months, maybe a couple of weeks, couple of months, and then take time off and focus on something, recovering or focus on something completely different, gather energy and reflect and so on, then move on to the next project or move on with the same client to another part of the project and so on. But usually creative people work in bursts and like in sprints, and remote work and freelancing is much better suited to do that, basically, because you're kind of like your own little agency. And
absolutely. Yeah. And that's something that I actually, I would say spend a good effort on in projects. I really, I'm an advocate of Scrum and, agile methodologies. And one thing that I actually like to do is to actually take charge of the whole project whenever it's possible. And, actually organize the project in sprints, define what is valuable together with the client, and then, move in a way that's actually crafted around my lifestyle and also fits, the client's objectives.
Yeah.
And whether it's within a project or, on the long term, as you were talking about, it's true that I also like to, now take more time now that I have more projects and, I get clients more easily, is to actually wonder, I'm going to basically exchange this amount of my time for a project. So I want it to be worth my time, not just financially speaking, but what kind of, activity do I want to do during that probably long amount of time that I'm going to spend on the project. So I think about it a lot. And between projects, I usually switch back to my own, side projects and personal projects, which gives me a kind of balance and also allows me to be a bit more conscious with the way that I choose projects.
Definitely. I mean, that's definitely the way to keep up your motivation and creativity and happiness, I feel, as a creative person, because you grant yourself the freedom that you need, basically. And it's important.
Totally.
And that's so cool that now a lot more people are able to do that due to the remote work possibilities. And
it's becoming it's becoming quite common. One thing that I've noticed, though, is that people who are still in that mindset of trying to control their workforce as employees that are in their offices have come up with a kind of scheme where they offer you remote work in a form that seems to be freelance, where you work as an independent contractor, but they actually try to sell you conditions and equity that actually mimic very closely employee conditions. And I find that oftentimes it's a way for companies to have a cheaper workforce and find talent on a global scale without having to actually manage employees locally. And maybe that's just one of the ways that work is evolving towards something that's a bit more free.
Yeah,
but I've noticed that it's a little shady, to be honest.
Yeah,
I was contacted by a big crypto company through LinkedIn. I actually get quite a decent amount of work through LinkedIn based on the location that I put down. So they were offering me a role, which was pretty interesting, to be honest. And they wanted to have a chat. So we had a chat, and it was a pretty good interview. It was interesting. I learned a lot about the company and the project. But then in the end, the person who I was talking to revealed to me that it was only the first step in a pretty lengthy process of 3 or 4 interviews with a test project.
Okay.
And at some point, I'm stopping her and I'm like, you reached out to me. Obviously, you valued the work that I've produced. So what is going on? Do you want to get to work? I'm also no bullshit kind of person. Like I would tell things straight up. And I'd be like, I'd love to work on this, but let's work, or, let's go our own ways. And it was very vague and basically trying to sell me an idea of becoming a remote freelancer that's tied to employee conditions.
Yeah, I don't like that either. Like, especially if we also have a testing process at Glolent, but I try to keep it as simple.
But it's different, right?
Yeah.
It's different because you're testing for people to join an in-group, which then provides them with work that is relatively free in terms of conditions.
Yes, exactly.
And, you have to have a selection process, because then you're going to go to companies and clients, and you need to assure them some level of quality from
exactly. Yeah, exactly. And
you want to be sure that the people you present actually represent you with authenticity and actually stand up for the values that you share.
Exactly. And then
that's perfectly fine.
Yeah, and even give them a reason why they can skip their lengthy test process. But yeah,
and then in the long term also, it's you take this selection process to join Glolent, but you do this once, and then whenever there are projects, I would assume you have an interview, a quick chat with the client, and then decide to work together or not. So
yeah, that would be the ideal. Yes, we always ask the client to reduce the interview time if possible, because it's basically free time that you as a freelancer give to them, and you're mostly not paid for this. Sometimes clients pay for this, but I feel they should more often pay for even like a probation time, especially probation time, or a set of interviews and so on, because it's already a commitment from you when they need your services, basically, right? So
yeah, I think that's why I think generally speaking, with a client, it depends on the project, the scale of the project and so on, and the number of stakeholders, of course, that have a say in how the project starts and so on. But I would say, generally speaking, once you know what I do and you've taken a look at the work that I produced, and we've exchanged, we've talked to each other, and you know what the process is, at this point, there's not much else to talk about.
Exactly, yeah. Yeah, that's why I like to just kick it off with, with a smaller project, and
absolutely, yeah.
And then you kind of gotta try it to work together, and then you see what you got, basically.
Yeah, that's the final test, isn't it? Just having a short scope for a sprint or a couple of days of trial, and then see if it's actually a good fit in practice.
Exactly, yeah. That's definitely it. So, yeah,
So I've been fortunate enough, I would say, the past 2 years, to have enough work that I'm able to, say no. It's important. When you start out, you're probably looking for every project you can take, and as you take more and you receive more requests, then you're able to give yourself the freedom of choice and the freedom of actually choosing how you want to spend your time. I think that's something I'm really fortunate.
That's great. So, basically, sounds really good how you organize yourself and how you basically view or put your priorities down. And yeah, it was really great to discuss with you. That, I mean, that wasn't planned at all. So we just had a conversation basically, and that was.
That's how it should be. You know, I watch a lot of podcasts, and the ones that I prefer are the ones where, you know, conversation just flows, you know, and can talk about anything and just, you know, really react to each other. And I think it's an interesting way. That's one of the things that I like, I would say, on social media is the podcasts, and it's great. I don't know. What podcasts do you listen to, for example, or watch?
I listen to different podcasts. Like I like to listen to Naval Ravikant. I don't know if you know.
Oh, you'll have to send me those and maybe write them in the description.
Yeah, definitely. Yes,
for the listeners.
But also sometimes, you know, the most popular I think one of the most popular podcasts is the Joe Rogan podcast.
Oh yeah, I definitely watch some of those based on the guest, of course.
Yeah, exactly. And sometimes it's so interesting, like when he has Lance Armstrong there or someone, you know, that gets quite interesting. Like, and also he sometimes touches on, like, he gets to talk to Elon Musk on a podcast.
Yeah, exactly.
You know, that is
yeah, it's pretty amazing.
Yeah.
I mean, how fortunate are you to be able to, you know, even as a viewer or listener, to be able to, you know, by proxy, pick some of the greatest minds out there, and you know, get inspired.
Exactly.
Cool.
Yeah.
I also watch and listen to some more, you know, just fun podcasts, like The King and the Sting. With comedian Theo Von, and former UFC fighter Brandon Schaub.
Okay.
It's just good to relax. Yeah, just nothing serious.
Yes.
But yeah, absolutely.
That's great. Like, do you listen to more comedic podcasts or?
So I used to not really like, you know, comedians, like stand-up comedians.
Yeah.
And now I find myself, you know, for the parts of the day where I just want to relax, or I'm doing something that's not really requiring my, I would say, you know, grammar, attention, or intellectual load, is that I listen to more like comedic podcasts. Chris D'Elia is another one also.
Oh yeah, definitely.
I think it's good.
You know the Ricky Gervais show with Carl Pilkington. You know that.
Oh, I know Ricky Gervais. I never listened to his podcast.
It's one of the first really big successful podcasts, and that's basically how I got into podcasting, listening to podcasts basically, because it was so relaxing. Like you said, it was just like three friends: Ricky Gervais, Stephen Merchant, and Carl Pilkington, like just talking about regular life from like funny perspectives. And that was all it took, you know, so simple.
Yeah, it's good. It's a good concept, and it sort of brings that also that feeling of, you know, being with a group of people and having a good laugh, even if, for example, you're just on your own working in your office. Yeah,
it kind of creates this virtual, almost virtual circle of friends for you. So it's true. I felt.
By the way, we were talking about Elon Musk, and now we're talking about, you know, virtual reality and sorts. What do you think about the theory of simulation?
The theory of simulation. Yeah, I know that we're living in a simulation. I pretty much agree that this must be the case.
It's interesting because I think it was on the Joe Rogan podcast actually, it was another one. It was a TV interview where people asked him about it, and they were asking Elon Musk if he thinks we're living in this situation. So for the listeners out there who are not familiar with it, the idea is that basically any sufficiently advanced society, and when we look at our society, for example, where we have technology to build games that are more and more realistic, is that soon enough we will reach a point with virtual reality and CGI where it's indistinguishable from actual reality.
Yeah.
And the idea is that at the rate that we're progressing now, the probability that we've already gotten there, and this right now is a simulation that we've already created, is extremely high. And that's how he answered the question, actually. They asked him if he thought we were in the simulation. He dodged the thinking question, and he said, well, it's just extremely likely that we are in one.
Yeah,
it's
exactly.
Impossible we're not in one. And it's funny because the interviewer didn't get that. And it's like, so you think we're in one? And he was just talking probability,
I love that dynamic also. Like Joe interviews really, really smart people sometimes that are really scientific. And he's also smart. Like he likes to put himself down, but he's also
absolutely
very smart. But sometimes things fly over his head because he doesn't.
And it's so good. I think it's the best. Like the jokes, or especially the jokes that are just slipped within a conversation and just completely go over Joe Rogan's head.
Yeah,
you get to enjoy them.
Exactly. Yeah, I think that's funny. It makes him. I think his biggest strength is he's very multifaceted. He has like a lot of very diverse interests, and he's very likable. Relatable.
And he's very good at. I would say, even though he has some pretty firm ideas himself, he's really good at being open and being a student within these podcasts.
Yeah, it's true. Yeah.
He puts himself in place of a viewer who has some education in some fields, but really eager to learn more from the actual guests. So I think it's a really good dynamic in terms of letting the guests speak and actually putting them in a setting that they're comfortable enough to open up.
You know what what I would like to see is someone doing a podcast talking about our podcast, how we talked about Joe's podcast.
Podcastception.
Exception, yeah, exactly.
Yeah, that'd be pretty funny. If your podcast reaches a level where people are actually talking about it in another podcast, I think that's a pretty good achievement.
Yeah, it would be. Yeah, it would be great. But that level of inception would be amazing. Then we reached peak podcast, basically. Cool, Erwan. It was a pleasure to have you, and we have to come to an end. We had a very wide variety of topics. Do you want to tell the listeners anything? Where can they find you? Reach out to you on LinkedIn. You said we're going to link the.
Sure, you can find me on LinkedIn. So pretty much any social media, mostly LinkedIn, Facebook, Instagram. So beside my design work, I do some photography. You can find me on Instagram. Name is Erwan, ERWAN, Compes, COMPS. And you can see a bit more of Tahiti, for example, through my Instagram. And I'm rebuilding it now, but I would say, based on our talk, that when the podcast is published, my new website will be live. So it's erwancompes.com. And there you can see some case studies and more about my design practice.
Okay, that sounds great. So we will definitely link.
Oh, I do one more thing. I do also have a YouTube channel where I make some videos. I haven't posted in a while, but I've got a bunch of tutorials if you want to learn how to build your own high-performance road bike. And I got a few tutorials on how to build, for example, a standing desk, things like this. So check it out. Also, Erwan Compes on YouTube. But I'm sure you'll put the links down.
Yeah, definitely. We're going to put everything in the show notes and on our blog. And we'll have all the information, how to reach out to you and how to connect. So thanks again for joining us here, and to all the listeners, thanks for tuning in. And we will have this episode live, and we'll inform you, everyone, and would be a pleasure to share in your channels, basically. And until the next time, stay tuned.
Thanks. It was a pleasant talk. I'll talk to you soon. Thanks for having me on.
My pleasure. Bye-bye.
Thank you for listening to the Glolent podcast, the podcast for freelancing and remote work in practice.